They're not stealing your energy by force. They don't need to, because you're giving it away. Every time you scroll past your intuition, every time you laugh at something that makes your nervous system shrink, every time you suppress rage to appear calm, shrink light to stay likable, or swallow truth to avoid being the one who sees too clearly, you are feeding the system, not metaphorically, literally. Because energy is not a concept, it's currency, and your field is a generator. You don't just have energy, you broadcast it, you radiate it, you leak it, and what you leak is not lost. It's harvested, redirected, captured, fed into structures that were built to stay alive off your suppression. You are trained to call this normal, to call this just being tired, just being busy, just life. But it's not. It's extraction. You are an energetic resource, and no one told you how to protect what you are, because the moment you do, the system loses power, not just over you, but in itself. The system doesn't run on logic. It runs on vibration. It doesn't need your belief. It needs your submission. And that submission is invisible when you don't know your own frequency. You've been taught to guard your time, your money, your image, but not your field, not your signal, not your coherence. And that's where they enter, through your blind spot, through the moment you say yes when your gut said no, through the half second where you override your body because the external demand felt louder than your internal knowing. That's the breach point. And they're harvesting not because they're evil, but because they can. Because incoherent fields are porous. Because people who don't know their own signal are easy to shape, easy to feed from, easy to redirect. And most people are feeding the system just by being nice, just by complying, just by softening their signal enough to be allowed into a room that was never meant to hold their real frequency. You think it's harmless to stay silent, harmless to agree for the sake of peace. But every time you collapse your spine, censor your truth, accept energetic imbalance, you are leaking charge. You are giving the system permission to feed. And that permission becomes pattern, not once, daily, hourly, until it's your normal, until exhaustion becomes your baseline. Until you don't even question why your light dims around certain people, places, roles, screens. Because you've been trained to normalize depletion. But depletion is not neutral. It's not just too many tasks or not enough rest. Depletion is architecture, designed, maintained, installed through cultural loops, algorithmic manipulation, interpersonal codependency, emotional bypassing. You are being trained to regulate yourself for the comfort of systems that don't nourish you. And in return, they drain what you could be using to build, create, expand. You're told it's your mindset, your habits, your discipline. But none of those matter when your energy is being bled out by unconscious agreements with a structure that only survives if you never wake up to what you really are. A sovereign field. A closed-loop signal. A source, not a battery, and they know it. That's why energy extraction doesn't look like violence anymore. It looks like distraction. It looks like shame. It looks like algorithms tuned to lower your signal by just enough that you keep scrolling instead of building, keep coping instead of feeling, keep pleasing instead of protecting. This is not about fear. This is about clarity, because once you name it, once you track the exits, once you close the loops, you're no longer a source they can harvest. You become self-generating. And a self-generating human is the most dangerous thing in the system, because they don't play the game. They build outside of it. They don't react. They anchor. They don't obey the broadcast. They become one. And that's what this is about. Not shielding, not hiding, but stabilizing the truth of your field so clearly that nothing enters without resonance. That nothing feeds unless it's reciprocal, that nothing drains unless it's allowed. This is not about isolation, it's about filtration, it's about precision. knowing what your energy feels like so deeply that anything foreign is obvious, unmistakable, and once it's obvious it can't extract, not without consent. And that consent stops now, not with fear, with awareness, with structure, with the realization that no one's coming to protect your frequency. That is your work. That is your field. And the moment you claim it, everything changes. You feel it first in your breath, then in your posture, then in your choices, then in your timing. The system feels it too, and it will test you. It will send the familiar loop in a new disguise. It will ask you to leak just one more time. But you won't, because you'll recognize the pattern. You'll name the portal. You'll close the opening, and you'll keep your charge. Not out of fear, out of truth, out of clarity, out of the knowing that energy is not infinite unless it is held in form, and you are that form now. You are not a battery, you are a boundary. They don't take your energy with weapons. They don't need violence. All they need is your agreement, your passive yes, your silence, your scrolling, your polite smile, your mental override that says, "This is fine," when every part of your body whispers, "This is extraction." Because the real extraction doesn't look like theft. It looks like connection. It looks like participation. It looks like a million invisible compromises stitched into your day. That notification you opened even though you felt resistance. That video you watched even though it made you feel smaller. That conversation you had where you nodded and laughed while your gut curled. None of it is neutral. All of it is charge. And charge is fuel, and fuel is currency, and currency always flows toward the dominant structure. So here's how it works. You wake up. Your nervous system hasn't even calibrated, and the first thing you touch is your phone. Not your breath, not your spine, a screen. That screen speaks first. Its frequency sets the tone. It's not what you see. It's what you feel. Hundreds of silent messages before you've even opened your mouth. You're too late. You're not enough. You're behind. Compare, react, get louder, perform alignment. You're already leaking, not because the information is bad, but because you let it speak before your own field had a chance to anchor. You've been extracted from before you've even stood up. Then you enter the day. You put on a face, not the one that reflects your truth, the one that's palatable, professional, polite. You shape your frequency for the room, not for your source. You read the people around you and shift to be digestible, approachable, safe. Energetically, this is compression. And compression without release becomes fragmentation. And fragmentation becomes distortion. And distorted fields are easy to feed on because they can't hold charge. They discharge constantly, through doubt, through contradiction, through internal conflict. Every time you betray a micro-instinct, a subtle knowing, a tension in your jaw you dismiss, you're offering up power to the field around you, not because you're weak, because you're untrained. No one taught you how to recognize your signal. No one gave you language for energetic consent. You were taught manners, logic, productivity, but not resonance. And without resonance, you are directionless. You move based on demand, on approval, on reflex. And this is where the harvesting deepens. Because now you think your energy is a resource to be used, not protected. You say yes because it feels good to be wanted. You overextend because being helpful keeps you safe. You don't rest because your worth is measured in output. This is extraction dressed as identity. You think it's just who you are, but it's not. It's what you were shaped into. A field tuned to feed everyone but itself. And the more generous you are, the more you're praised. You're called kind, reliable, selfless. But what they really mean is, you're accessible. Your signal is open. Your boundaries are soft. You can be reached, used, absorbed. You won't notice because you think you're giving. But you're not. You're leaking. And leakage isn't love. Leakage is unprotected charge. And charge attracts code, so the more you leak, the more the system attaches. Algorithms read your nervous system and serve you the exact frequency that keeps you stuck. The scrolling loop you call rest, it's not rest. It's energetic limbo. The endless swipe keeps you in the liminal space where no decision can be made, no emotion fully felt, no boundary enforced. And that is the perfect harvesting state, not collapsed, not activated. Just slightly disoriented, slightly dissociated, slightly off, and slightly is enough, because you're not a victim, you're a conduit, and conduits don't need to be destroyed, they just need to be confused. Confusion breaks coherence, and incoherence opens the gate. This is why content feels more addictive when you're tired, why conversations feel more draining when you're disconnected, why catching up with certain people feels like dehydration. It's not just social, it's energetic. They're not bad people, but they've become open loops. And open loops feed on clarity. If you bring clarity into an incoherent field, one of two things happens. The field rises, or it feeds. And if you're not stabilized, it will feed. It will take the clarity as fuel. It will wrap around your signal and pull you down just enough that you doubt yourself. Just enough that you soften your edge. Just enough that you question your knowing. And that moment of doubt, that's the gateway. You open. They receive. The system feeds. And this happens hundreds of times per day. On the micro, you dismiss the message. You delay the response. You feel drained but push through. You feel tension but call it normal. And every time you normalize a contraction, you broadcast, "This is allowed." And the system says thank you. It doesn't punish, it thanks. It rewards your leak with another chance to leak. A new loop, a new test, a new relationship that mirrors the last one. A job that looks different but drains the same. A spiritual tool that says heal but subtly says not yet. This is harvesting wrapped in healing. You're sold tools for protection that require you to stay unprotected. You're given modalities that only work if you keep believing you're broken. This is the loop. You feed it by needing fixing. You stay in it by searching for help outside your own signal. But your signal isn't broken. It's buried beneath politeness, performance, pressure. To exit the loop, you don't need to fight. You need to anchor. You need to feel what's yours, but not what's loud. You need to rebuild your signal in silence. You need to let the noise die. Because only in the silence do you start to notice the real shape of your energy, the part of you that doesn't respond to demand, the part that doesn't shift to be liked, the part that says no before the brain understands why. That part is your protection, not your words, not your logic, your tone, your field, your spine. And the more you live from that, the less you leak. The more you hold, the less they can reach. You're not cutting people off. You're cutting access. You're not being harsh. You're being precise. You're not shielding. You're sealing. Your energy is not public property. It never was. It's time you remembered that. Burnout isn't exhaustion. It's separation. From signal, from source, from yourself. You think you're just tired, but real rest doesn't fix it. A nap doesn't touch it. A vacation doesn't clear it. Because what you're calling fatigue is actually an energetic dislocation, a fracture in your frequency that happened one yes too many, one suppression too often, one loop too long. Your system didn't collapse overnight. It cracked incrementally. Each time you said, "I'm fine," when you weren't. Each time you gave when you didn't have. Each time you smiled while your gut screamed. That's burnout. Not a moment, a pattern, not a weakness, a signal. And the signal isn't asking for rest, it's asking for restoration. And restoration doesn't happen horizontally, it happens structurally. You don't need more sleep. You need a nervous system that isn't performing safety while screaming internally. You don't need more alone time. You need boundaries that don't collapse the moment someone needs you. You don't need a break. You need a rebuild, because what collapsed wasn't your energy. It was your architecture. The framework that holds your signal got overloaded, and instead of stabilizing, you leaked, slowly, quietly, until depletion felt normal, until fog became baseline, until functioning became enough. But you weren't born to function. You were built to broadcast. And that broadcast can't happen when your entire field is in survival mode. Because survival mode isn't tired, it's distorted. It makes you chase peace instead of anchoring it. It makes you grasp for clarity instead of embodying it. It makes you seek rest from systems that cause the drain. This is the burnout loop. It's not physical, it's vibrational, and it won't stop until you shift the code. That code begins with one realization. Your energy isn't meant to serve everything that asks. Your yes is sacred. Your attention is currency. Your body is the boundary. But you were trained out of that, trained to override your instincts, trained to obey urgency, trained to collapse your truth in the name of professionalism, kindness, success. You were taught to be useful before being full. That's not noble. That's distortion. Because a depleted human is easy to manage, easy to mold, easy to feed from. You can't question systems when your signal is offline. You can't hold truth when your body is in shutdown. That's why burnout is encouraged, quietly, systematically. Because a burnt-out field is a compliant one, and healing isn't real unless it ends that loop. So how do you exit? Not by sleeping more, not by saying affirmations, but by stopping the leak. First, name the source, the real one. Not the surface tasks, the agreements. What are you still agreeing to that shrinks you? Who are you still performing for to feel safe? Where do you still say yes while your spine says no? These are your leak points, and until they close, you'll stay drained. Second, restore your signal. Not with noise, not with stimulation, with silence, with stillness, with subtraction. The field can't reset if you keep pouring new information into it. You need a signal reset. You need stillness long enough to feel where you begin and everything else ends. That's when coherence starts. And coherence is your power. Because coherence isn't calm, it's clarity, it's structure, it's knowing without proving. That kind of signal repels distortion. That kind of signal can't be fed on. But it takes work to get there, not outer work. Internal recalibration. You must rebuild your frequency with intention, moment by moment, breath by breath, choice by choice. You must replace performative alignment with actual embodiment. You must replace reactive kindness with rooted clarity. You must stop calling your depletion normal. Because every time you normalize the drain, you anchor it. You make it harder to see. But once you name it, once you feel it, once you say no more, the system trembles. Not because you're loud, because you're finally unavailable. That's real protection. Not walls, not shields. Availability to what nourishes. Inaccessibility to what doesn't. And here's the shift. You don't need to protect your energy. You need to protect your access. You're not fragile, you're potent. But potency without precision leaks. So you don't need defense, you need design. Design that holds your charge, routines that regulate your field, environments that don't fragment your signal, people that don't require performance. And if you don't have that, you start building it now, with one no, with one breath, with one decision not to collapse. And you do it daily, not for survival, for signal, for truth, for your field to remember its shape, because your energy isn't tired, it's misused. And once it's aligned again, you stop needing rest. You become rest for yourself, for others, but not at your own expense. Never again. You've been told to watch out for energy vampires, people who drain your energy, leave you exhausted, and pull you into their chaos. But the truth is more complex. They don't always look toxic. They're not always loud. Sometimes they're the person who needs just a second of your time. The friend who's always going through something. The client who can't move forward without your help. the conversation that feels innocent but leaves you tired. They don't always know they're feeding, and neither do you. Because the system trained you not to recognize energetic imbalance, especially when it's dressed as empathy. You think helping is always holy, that listening is always love, that making space is always kind. But here's the truth: not all helping is healing, not all listening is service, and not all space should be held. Because energy moves, it transfers, it binds, and if you're not aware of your field, you're not giving, you're leaking. And when you leak, someone else feeds. That's not their fault, but it is your responsibility. Because energy vampires aren't monsters. They're unanchored humans with porous fields, who learn to regulate through others. They're people who lost their own signal, so they find stability in yours. Not because they're evil, because they're scared, because no one taught them to self-source, because the system rewarded dependency, not sovereignty. So now they reach, they attach, they loop, and if you're not stabilized, you become the source. They speak, you absorb. They collapse, you hold. They panic, you calm. And it feels like service, but it's not. It's extraction. Because holding someone's chaos when they're not willing to shift it isn't love, it's leakage, especially when it's chronic, especially when they don't integrate, especially when they rely on your frequency because they haven't rebuilt their own. And here's the shadow no one wants to name. Sometimes you are them. Sometimes you reach instead of regulate. Sometimes you attach instead of anchor. Sometimes you share not to be seen, but to siphon. It's not malicious. It's patterned. Because you were taught to process externally, to share everything, to open your field indiscriminately in the name of authenticity. But openness without containment isn't authenticity. It's vulnerability without structure. And that kind of openness invites code, unconscious need, subtle pull. You don't need to be toxic to drain someone. You just need to forget your own center. And the moment you disconnect from your own field, you reach for theirs. We all do it, especially when we're ungrounded, especially when we're afraid. But that's where the work begins. Not in blame, in responsibility. You are responsible for the state of your field. You are responsible for the energy you offer and the energy you allow. And that begins with noticing. Who do you feel drained around, even when the interaction seems fine? Who do you feel pulled to fix, rescue, soothe, even when they haven't asked? Whose emotions feel louder than your own body's signals? Whose chaos do you carry? Whose pain do you solve before they even speak it? That's the loop. That's where you leak. That's where the harvest happens. Because whether you're reaching or rescuing, the pattern is the same. You're moving outside your field. And any movement outside your field that isn't chosen is leakage. And leakage is what fuels the system. The system doesn't care who's draining who, as long as someone's not in their power. As long as someone's leaking and someone's feeding. That's the loop. And it's not broken by calling people out. It's broken by anchoring in. The real protection isn't shielding from others, it's strengthening your core. Because a strong field can't be fed on. It doesn't resist. It doesn't collapse. It reflects. That reflection either elevates or repels, but it never absorbs. That's the standard now. Not because you're cold, because you're clear. Not because you don't care, because you care enough not to enable. You care enough not to feed loops. You care enough not to participate in harvesting, yours or theirs. And the moment you anchor in that clarity, your relationships shift. Some deepen, some leave, some implode. Let them. The field is organizing itself. And only those who self-source will stay, not because they're perfect, but because they're doing the work. And the work isn't about never leaking, it's about noticing when you do and closing the portal. Fast, without shame, without story, with presence. Because presence seals what performance always exposes. And from there, you stop the cycle. You become non-reactive, not numb, available, not accessible, charged, not exhausted. You become the one who holds without absorbing, loves without losing signal, speaks without seeking validation. And that is what ends the loop. That is what starves the system. That is how we stop feeding distortion and start building a field strong enough to hold what's real. They can't use what they can't reach, and they can't reach what doesn't open by default. The field you carry is not meant to be porous, it's meant to be precise. But you were never taught to build it. You were taught to be nice, to be available, to be open, always open. Don't be closed off, they said. Don't be difficult. Don't be selfish. So you became accessible, energetically, emotionally, digitally. You said yes before feeling. You answered before checking. You let people in before asking why. You let energy in without knowing what it wanted. That's not openness, that's exposure. And exposure without discernment is how the field fractures. And fractured fields don't hold power, they mimic it. They perform strength through control, through shielding, through distance. But performance isn't protection. Performance leaks. Because anything you need to prove isn't stable. Anything you need to say repeatedly isn't embodied. Anything you have to defend isn't fully yours. Real protection doesn't explain itself. It radiates. It repels distortion without trying. It reflects energy without absorbing it. It doesn't attack. It doesn't argue. It doesn't collapse. It holds. You don't build that kind of field through defense. You build it through design. Energetic design is architecture. It's the structure of your nervous system, your beliefs, your daily rituals, your relationship to silence. It's what you do before anyone enters the room. It's how you wake up, how you breathe, what you consume, what you allow, and what you immediately reject without apology. The field is not something you have. It's something you shape every minute with every choice. The foods you eat affect it, the light you expose yourself to, the language you internalize, the people you message, the way you speak to your body. Every piece becomes part of your electromagnetic coherence, and coherence is everything. Because coherent fields can't be hijacked. Incoherent ones are easy to rewrite. They absorb energy that isn't theirs. They believe thoughts that aren't theirs. They feel emotions that aren't theirs. And they live lives that aren't theirs. That's the cost of energetic laziness. That's the cost of default yes, of unfiltered input, of unconscious agreement. So what do? You design deliberately. You wake up and speak to your field before anyone else does. You breathe until you feel your spine, not your phone. You eat for frequency, not stimulation. You move your body like it holds memory, mother, because it does. You treat silence not as absence, but as calibration. And most importantly, you curate your space like your life depends on it. Because it does. Your room, your inbox, your relationships, your schedule, none of them are neutral. All of them are inputs. All of them code your field. All of them determine what can access you and what cannot. And if you don't design that, the world will do it for you. The algorithm will. The market will. The wounded will. And then you'll think your exhaustion is personal, when really it's systemic, a product of being available to what doesn't nourish. But here's the shift. You don't need to fight the system. You just need to become unavailable to it. That's the secret. Protection isn't about creating walls, it's about becoming signal locked. When your field is anchored, everything either rises to meet it or it leaves. No argument, no confrontation, no defense, just clarity. And clarity doesn't leak. It doesn't chase. It doesn't shrink. It doesn't let things slide. It names. It chooses. It exits. And if you want to build that, you need to start living like your yes is sacred, like your attention is currency, Like your nervous system is a temple, not a trash can, not a public square. A temple with doors that don't open unless it's safe, and thresholds that test everything before it enters. That level of discernment is radical, and it's rare, because it requires discomfort. It requires saying no when it would be easier to comply. It requires solitude when it would be easier to distract. It requires silence when it would be easier to vent. But once you do it, once your field stabilizes, everything changes. People stop treating you like a resource. They either meet you in resonance or they disappear. Opportunities stop draining you. They either amplify your truth or they dissolve. Conversations stop looping. They either deepen or end. This is the gift of an unharvestable field, not one that isolates, one that chooses, one that doesn't need shields, because it has standards, and standards are magnetic. They don't repel connection, they attract integrity, because when you raise your field, the universe matches it, always. So if you're surrounded by chaos, by collapse, by demand, check your access points. Check what you've allowed in because you were afraid of being alone. Check what you've tolerated because you didn't want to seem too much. Check what you're leaking in the name of love, loyalty, service. That's not love. That's collapse. And collapse is not your purpose. Holding is. Broadcasting is. Anchoring is. You don't protect your energy by shrinking. You protect it by expanding. Not outward, inward, into coherence, into clarity, into the frequency that can't be rewritten. That's your real shield. That's your real safety. And once you build it, you never need to explain yourself again. You hear voices in your head that aren't yours, but they sound like you. That's how the system works. It doesn't control you by force. It controls you by echo. It implants sentences so often, so early, so repetitively, that you mistake them for inner truth. Be realistic. You're not ready. Don't be selfish. It's too late. Just be grateful. What will they think? These aren't thoughts. They're scripts. And the moment you internalize them, your energy becomes programmable. Because belief is the software of reality. You don't manifest from desire, you manifest from code. And most of your code wasn't written by you, it was installed. By parents trying to keep you safe, by teachers trying to make you obedient, by media trying to make you insecure, by culture trying to make you compliant. None of it was accidental. All of it shaped your signal. Because the less you trust your own voice, the easier it is to follow someone else's. That's how harvesting works. Not by draining your energy directly, but by installing programs that make you leak it yourself. And because the thoughts feel familiar, you don't question them. You obey them. You justify them. You call them logic, maturity, being grounded. But they're not. They're echoes of fear wearing the costume of responsibility. And every time you follow them, your field weakens because every belief becomes a broadcast. And the system doesn't feed on your energy. It feeds on the broadcast of unworthiness, of hesitation, of guilt, of suppression. That's the real signal it wants. And it gets it every time you shrink for approval, every time you delay your truth, every time you obey a voice in your head without checking its source. So how do you stop? How do you unplug the broadcast? You start with identification. You start listening to every sentence you tell yourself as if it were a foreign object. I can't do this. Who said that first? What if I fail? Where did you learn that failure meant death? I'm not enough. Who taught you to measure your worth in output? These questions aren't mental, they're vibrational, because every belief has a frequency, and every frequency either opens your field or collapses it. There is no neutral thought. Every sentence you accept shapes your geometry, expands you or contracts you. That's why affirmations don't work if the underlying code remains. You can't overlay a positive thought on top of corrupted programming. The field won't stabilize. You have to rewrite. And rewrite doesn't mean resist. It means observe, then recode. You don't argue with the voice. You name it. You witness it. You separate it from your identity, because that's the key. The voice isn't you. It's a recording. It runs on loop until you become present enough to pause it. And once you pause it, you get to choose. That's the real sovereignty. Not doing whatever you want. Choosing what thoughts are allowed to shape your reality. That's where freedom starts. But it requires vigilance, not perfection. Vigilance. Because the voices don't leave easily. They're sticky. Especially when they've been rewarded, when guilt got you praise, when doubt kept you safe, when smallness got you love. Those payoffs are deep, but they're not sustainable. They cost too much. They cost your frequency, your clarity, your charge. So now you choose again. You stop using guilt as a moral compass. You stop using fear as a decision maker. You stop outsourcing your self-worth to anyone who benefits from your doubt. And you replace the voice, not with fantasy, but with signal, with knowing, with truth that doesn't need to be loud to be real. You say, I decide what's possible. I choose what enters my field. I write the code of my belief. No one else. And then you act like it. Not just in moments of clarity, but especially in moments of pressure. Because that's when the old voices get loud. They want to keep you safe. But safe is the most dangerous thing when your soul came here to expand. And you can't expand if your signal is still coded by someone else's fear. So you clear it. You breathe. You ask, is this thought mine? Is this feeling mine? Is this hesitation coming from truth or programming? And if it's not yours, you let it leave, not by force, by neutrality. Because the field doesn't respond to effort, it responds to frequency. And your true frequency is always calm, always stable, always unshakable. Once the noise is gone, that's the work, that's the real clearing. Not just saging your room, but purifying your language, your thoughts, your responses. Until the only voice left is the one that knows, not hopes, knows. And that voice never shouts. It never panics. It never guilts you. It whispers and waits. And once you hear it clearly, you'll realize the only thing that was ever harvested was your attention. The only thing that was ever stolen was your authorship. And the moment you reclaim it, no system, no person, no structure can code your field again, ever. You were told to manifest, to visualize, to believe it into being. The universe will bring you whatever you desire. But what if your desires aren't yours? What if what you're trying to attract is actually a program? A signal implanted through repetition, comparison, and invisible approval systems, because manifestation doesn't begin with desire, it begins with code. And most people don't know the difference. They think wanting something is natural. But the system is designed to teach you what to want. It seeds your mind through algorithms, ads, influencers, trends. It shows you curated symbols of success, beauty, freedom, and then trains you to associate fulfillment with their attainment. You don't question the impulse. You assume it's true. You see a lifestyle and feel a tug in your chest, and you call it alignment. But it's often addiction, it's often projection, it's often trauma dressed as preference. The car, the money, the relationship, the body, are they the echo of your soul or the product of marketing? The idea that something outside of you will complete you isn't manifestation. It's manipulation. And the moment you try to manifest from that place, your field fractures. Because your subconscious doesn't believe the story. It knows you're chasing an image, not integration. And energy doesn't respond to surface, it responds to signal. That's why you can work hard, say the affirmations, repeat the visualizations, and nothing changes. Because underneath, your frequency is still coded with lack. Still reaching, still chasing, still broadcasting, I am not enough. And the universe doesn't hear your words. It hears your vibration. It hears your signal. And signal always wins. So what's the solution? Purification. Not of the world, of your field, of your wants. You stop trying to manifest what they told you would make you happy. You stop trying to attract and start trying to remember. You ask, what is mine? What is genuinely aligned with my blueprint, not just my programming? What feels like truth, even when no one is watching? What excites me, even if I never posted about it? That's the first layer of sovereignty, reclaiming your desire, not killing it, clarifying it. Because desire is sacred. It's the compass of your evolution. But only when it's clean, only when it's yours. And that requires silence. It requires distance. It requires you to unplug from the frequency of everyone else's life and drop into your own. Because clarity never comes from comparison. It comes from resonance. And resonance doesn't shout, it hums. You feel it in your bones, in your breath, in your stillness. When you name a desire that is truly yours, your body says yes. It softens. It expands. It calibrates. That's the frequency from which manifestation becomes inevitable. Not because you tricked the universe, but because you matched it. You spoke the right language. And that language is coherence. That's all the field wants. Not performance, not repetition. Coherence. Alignment between thought, emotion, body, and soul. When that happens, you become the portal. You don't ask the universe to bring you anything. You become the version of you who already lives it. That's the real manifestation. Not attracting, remembering. Not waiting, embodying. But that embodiment requires detachment. You can't embody truth while clinging to image. You can't hold the real while chasing illusion. That's why the deepest manifestations come after the biggest ego deaths. After the moment you realize, I never wanted the thing. I wanted what I thought it would give me. Love, freedom, safety, expression. And here's the secret. Those things don't come from the outcome. They come from the signal. You can feel free before the money. You can feel loved before the relationship. You can feel safe before the success. And when you do, you collapse the distance. You collapse the loop. You become the field. And the field responds accordingly. Not because you're forcing, because you're fused. There is no gap between you and the life you're calling in, because you're no longer calling it in. You're living it now. That's how it shows up. That's how it becomes stable. But if you're still chasing, check the origin of the chase. Ask, who benefits from me believing I need this? Whose approval does this desire unlock? What version of me does this validate? And is that version even real? These aren't surface questions. They're structural. Because every unexamined desire is a potential program, and every program is an access point. For manipulation, for energy harvesting, for subtle disempowerment dressed as spirituality. You can't protect your energy if you're manifesting from wounds, because wounds distort signal. They skew your compass. They make you think survival is success. That's the trap. That's the loop. And the only way out is to go deeper. You stop asking, how do I get what I want, and start asking, who is the version of me that doesn't need to ask? That's the real magic. That's the real safety. That's the real freedom. And from that place, the universe doesn't just bring you what you desire, it brings you what you're coded to hold, because it trusts your field, because you trust your field. And that's the shift, not becoming powerful. Remembering you always were. You don't need more protection, you need permanence, stability, signal that doesn't waver when the noise gets loud. A field that doesn't collapse when others project. A center so anchored it makes chaos irrelevant. That's not defense. That's design. That's the final step. And the one almost no one teaches. Because permanent energetic stability isn't sexy. It's not flashy. It's not reactive. It's subtle. And it's built in silence. Not in rituals. Not in performance. In repetition. In decision. in the tiny, unsexy moments where you choose signal over story, truth over noise, self over performance, because every moment is a broadcast. Every choice is a vote. You're either confirming your coherence or fracturing it. There is no neutral. And once you know that, you stop looking for hacks. You stop asking, how do I protect my energy? And start asking, how do I stop leaking it in the first place? That's where the shift begins. You stop giving energy to people who haven't earned access. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding. You stop apologizing for needing space, solitude, slowness. You stop performing for algorithms. You stop packaging your truth to be digestible. You stop outsourcing your intuition. You stop seeking confirmation. You stop running your life through the lens of, will this make sense to others? And start living from, does this stabilize my field? That's the architecture of permanence. And once you build it, you no longer need protection, because nothing can access you unless you lower your frequency to meet it. That's the real safety, not shields, standards, not avoidance, anchoring, not defense, signal that speaks louder than words. That's when the harvesting ends. Because there's nothing left to harvest. No cracks, no entry points, no seeking, just sovereignty. And that sovereignty isn't angry. It isn't rebellious. It isn't loud. It's calm. It's so grounded, so stable, so uninterested in performance that the system stops seeing you as a resource. Because you've stopped broadcasting the frequency of need, of guilt-drenched productivity, of validation seeking, of silent desperation. Those frequencies are the entry point. And when they're gone, so is the interference. So what do you do next? You simplify. You clean your space. You clean your mind. You clean your digital feed. You clean your language. You stop speaking in code. You stop consuming from confusion. You stop entertaining energy that feels off but makes sense. You tune your field so precisely that anything not in resonance becomes instantly obvious. That's what they call discernment. But it's more than that. It's energetic precision, the frequency of I know, not I hope, not I'm trying. I know. Because your field doesn't lie. It tells you the truth, if you listen. And once you start listening, really listening, you realize that most of your confusion wasn't confusion. It was denial. It was override. It was pretending not to know what your field screamed. But you're done pretending. You're done leaking. You're done living on signal borrowed from systems that don't serve your soul. So you unplug, not from the world, from the lie. You stop feeding the matrix with your doubt, your guilt, your chronic availability, and you build a field so charged, so whole, so internally resourced, that the game can't play you anymore. And when that happens, you stop attracting takers, because you've stopped broadcasting use me. You stop attracting chaos, because you've stopped calling it excitement. You stop attracting collapse, because you've stopped mistaking it for transformation. And what's left? Peace. Not the kind that's quiet because you've silenced your truth, but the kind that's unshakable because you've claimed it. That's your birthright. Not just to have energy, but to hold it. Not just to glow, but to anchor. Not just to know who you are, but to live it fully without dilution. That's the final step, the one no one can give you, the one no system can program, the one only you can claim. So claim it. Own your signal. Lock your field. Choose yourself in every moment, in every interaction, in every thought, until protection is no longer a question, until you become the answer. And if this message felt like remembering, if something in you clicked into place, you already know what to do. Don't just listen, act. Don't just nod, shift. Don't just watch, integrate. Comment below, share what changed, and subscribe, because this channel isn't here to entertain you. It's here to remind you of what you've always known but forgot. Your energy is yours. Your field is sacred. And you never need to ask for permission again. Welcome back.